Okay, so I don't know if you've heard of Michael Foucault, but basically, he was an academic theorist who proposed this idea that modern society is gradually moving towards this panopticon, that people are constantly surveilled, that due to technology and due to advancements, we're continually sacrificing our rights to autonomy and agency. And the discussion that we're having revolves directly around that topic. And because of that, we must retain students' privacy and their rights, because even though they're children, they still have, governmental rights. They're still human beings. They may not be as adept at life as an adult, but they still have those liberties and those freedoms, and they ought to be kept. And that's why we have teachers retaining their positions as teachers. It's analogous to people complaining about policemen performing too many duties. When you have a teacher who is now the student's guardian in that context because they're in their own home, it's emblematic of a panoptic society wherein we are giving up privacy rights. And something that, my opponent fails to recognize is that when we're in a Zoom-mediated classroom and when teachers exercise equally as stringent punishments, and it has to do with the students' well-being in life when it's not their fault, it's much different than a classroom punishment, which is why I brought up the example of the student who had the BB gun, because it was an injustice. And the child, when they were on camera, they were taking a test and it was muted, and they weren't able to communicate to the teacher that they had a gun. So it was essentially a misunderstanding and a miscommunication that resulted in a school district threatening that child with expulsion because they had a BB gun for a brief moment and his brother was involved. So for us to instantly say, well, this child should be suspended or expelled for simply having something that they would normally, is absolutely absurd, and it's emblematic of how important privacy is. And let me get into whether the proposed criteria of the best learning environment as possible. I think in order for us to have that discussion, we have to first discuss how these privacies are being addressed within an online classroom. Because without a student being able to retain their private life to some degree, then you can't have a good learning environment in the first place. And I'd like to also mention that my policy is as a general rule. That is not to say that if somebody has a swastika, they are entitled to keep that up, because hate speech is not covered by the First Amendment, and people are people, and it's a case-by-case basis. And I'm just saying, as a general rule, as a general expectation, we should try to give the benefit of the doubt to the student first, similar to innocent until proven guilty, instead of, just putting the hammer down and saying you did something wrong because of Zoom, and therefore you must be punished. So, but I do like the discussion of, what produces the best learning environment, and I will respond to that in these rebuttals. So, if we are to have a good learning environment, and if we are to have a place where students can, safely do what they need to do, then I agree that, it shouldn't be the Wild West. Of course, I'm not advocating for that. And it's similar to the swastika. And so teachers can still administer punishments. They can still address when a student has done something wrong, but they must do it in the right way. And I'm saying that there's a slippery slope into a lot of students being mistreated. And in the article that I have, it's just on this Drive doc, there are a lot of other cases of students' rights being infringed upon, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense for us to have these Zoom classrooms if we don't recognize the fact that children are children. And I would argue that these expectations are retained because, if if we want to keep a similar standard of learning and normalcy, then we also have to adjust, as I mentioned in my first speech. We have to adapt to an online classroom, and we have to recognize that 9-year-old children don't have control of what's going on in their own home, which I would like to reaffirm. This is different than a college student who just started going on 4chan brandishing a swastika. Those examples are not comparable, of the kid with the BB gun and the college student with the swastika. So privacy allows us to produce a good learning environment. And without students being able to express themselves, or, like understanding the fact that their private life is private, then we will never be able to have a beneficial learning environment. Thank you.